All right, guys. Well, y'all got quieter faster than I thought you would. For those of you playing along at home, it was pure pandemonium in here until I walked up here. So, all right, guys. Well, it's been a while, so if you can remember where it is, turn to 2 Corinthians. It's been several weeks since we've been in 2 Corinthians. And I'll go ahead and give an update while the camera's on, as members are watching. I heard from the fellas on the mission trip in Waverly, and things are going well. It says that so far their main job has been to install flooring in a house. And so they've been doing that kind of stuff. They're staying at a church, and they're being treated well. And so, but we'll have them come and do a report maybe Sunday night the 10th, not this Sunday, but maybe the Sunday after that as part of the service. So they're taking pictures and that sort of thing. But anyway, it's going well. Bobby texted me this morning, and so y'all continue to pray for them. And then our youth are in East Tennessee, and they'll be heading back tomorrow. They should be getting back tomorrow evening, and I can stalk my oldest on my phone, so I know where they've been, and they've had a lot of fun. So anyway, well, we're in the last section, not the last chapter, but in the last section of 2 Corinthians. It goes through chapter 13. We're up to chapter 11, and we're in the part where Paul is taking on the people who are opposed to him. He's gonna really call them out in our text tonight. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing. I don't know if we'll get through it all. In fact, I kind of broke it in half. The whole thing is almost the whole chapter, but I broke it at verse 15 just because I figure y'all want to get home and either get to choir practice or supper or whatever happens after Wednesday night at some point. So let me just read to you. This is 2 Corinthians 11, 1 through 15. Paul says, I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Indeed, I consider that I'm not in the least inferior to these super apostles, even if I'm unskilled in speaking. I'm not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. When I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why not? Because I do not love you? God knows that I do. What I am doing, I will continue to do, in order to undermine the claims of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission they work on the same terms as we do. But such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. Paul doesn't hold back here in talking about his opponents. Right there in the last part, he calls them servants of Satan. He refers to them as his servants, and he's just mentioned Satan. When you have the authority of an apostle that Paul does, an authority that doesn't exist today, but one that did then, to say in a letter, in Scripture, which is what this is, these people are servants of Satan, that is pretty weighty. So we know that they are, and we know he has the authority to say that, and he knows what's going on. So what is happening is there are people who have been opposed to Paul and who are really puffing themselves up. He refers to them kind of in a smart aleck way as super apostles. We'll get back to that verse in a minute. They're bragging about themselves, who they are, they're teaching, they're putting Paul down, and he says they're servants of Satan. So they're bringing false teaching into the church. So go back to verse 1, and we'll work our way back through the paragraph here, see how far we get. He says in verse 1, I wish that you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me. Now, he's gonna hold off on the foolishness until around verse 21. And so he's putting that idea out there, and then around verse 21, he's going to say, I'm speaking as a fool, and he's going to brag about himself and talk about all the stuff that he's been through. But before he gets to all that, he lays out his concern for the people at Corinth, his opposition to the people who are trying to suppress him and who he is and the true teaching. So he gets back to the foolishness because what we're reading tonight isn't what he's talking about. He's going to get to that later. Remember, the chapters and verses are all put in later. This is just one flowing letter when he wrote it, and so he'll get to the foolishness in a minute. And even that, it's not actually foolishness. He's just using it in a way to combat his opponents. So he talks about how he feels about this church. Remember, this is a church he started, people he knows by face, by name. He says, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. One of the images of the church in the New Testament is that we are the bride of Christ. Paul would write that in Ephesians 5. And so that's the imagery that he's giving there. He's talking to the church. He's talking about their relationship with Jesus. But he says something very interesting about this. And I understand, as a pastor, I understand what he's saying. He says, I feel a divine jealousy for you. He is concerned because people that he loves and cares for, who he has taught the truth to, now have someone in their midst who are teaching false things. I mean, I can't imagine, if let's say I was on, vacation somewhere, or, if the Lord called me somewhere else, or whatever it might be, and I'm not standing up here, and I suddenly get word that some, guest preacher that nobody knew this was going to happen gets up here and starts preaching and teaching false doctrine. That's gonna really hurt. I mean, I'm going to be concerned for y'all. It's going to, because God has called me to stand up here and to preach and teach the truth. And if I heard about the opposite of that happening, that would be awful. That would be gut-wrenching for me. I mean, I know exactly what he's talking about here. So he has established this church. He has known these people. He has discipled them. He has built them up. They fought like crazy, right? As you remember, there's according to internal evidence, there are 4 letters he wrote to the church at Corinth. God preserved 2. So they're always going back and forth. The church itself has all kinds of problems. They're mad at him. He's mad at them. They're not treating one another right. People are dying because of how they take the Lord's Supper. People have all kind of immorality going on in the church. I mean, it's just really messed up. But he still loves them, and he knows them, and he cares about them. And now he's getting word that as messed up as they are, now these false teachers are in there. And so he's got to deal with these things. So it really hurts him. He's really concerned. Think about if you knew something bad was going on with your kids and you weren't there and you couldn't do something about it. That's what's happening here. But then he explains why. He says, but I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, and keep in mind, later in this paragraph, he's going to say these guys are servants of Satan. So he keeps that all throughout here. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. These people were not mature in their faith. This was a church that really had trouble getting grounded. This is a church that had trouble maturing in their faith. It's a church that was susceptible to this kind of thing. If you have, this is one of the reasons new church starts. A pastor, a church planter needs to stay for quite a while. and really get that thing established. Even if they then go on and plant more churches, you need to stay and get it done. And Paul was with them for quite a while and would leave leadership behind and all of that. But we know from what they're described as in 1 Corinthians, the divisions that they have. I am of Paul, I am of Cephas, I am of Jesus, I am of Apollos. The behaviors they have. Some would show up for the Lord's Supper, having, gotten drunk at home and all that sort of thing. The implication is they most likely were out of order in how they were doing church. That's why you've got chapters 12, 13, and 14 about spiritual gifts and how things are supposed to go. This is a church that had not grown, it wasn't mature like some of the others. If you're in that position, you can be easily fooled. People can, little kids will believe things that people tell them. And these are spiritual little children. And so if these false teachers come in and they're good speakers, because he's going to talk about his ability to speak in a moment. And apparently these people were really good pulpiteers. They were really good teachers. And so I want to pause here for a minute and say, one of the things that you and I have to keep in mind, and time has shown this over and over again, and we get reminded of it every few years, is that the ability to speak well does not equal character. It happens constantly. Unfortunately, the ability to speak well will often land you the ability to go from one church to the next because people want somebody who speaks well. But there may be no character there. There may be dishonesty. There may be immaturity. There may be selfishness, whatever it might be. And so we're always susceptible to a good speaker. We're always susceptible to someone who looks like they ought to look, sounds like they ought to sound, is well organized, whatever the thing is of the day. In their day, it was being a master of the art of rhetoric and how to be persuasive and how to do it in a manipulative way. And that's what these people were doing. Nowadays, for us, it's, do you look a certain way? Do you speak a certain way? There's all that sort of stuff that people are looking for. That's who can really lead us astray, is the people that on the outside appear to be all the stuff, right? We make fun and laugh about Joel Osteen and his smile and his teeth and all that, but he has that presentation, right? He's kind of, you can't really tell, but he strikes me as not short, right? Because height matters, right? The tallest candidate almost always wins the political race. So we pay attention to that kind of stuff. He's in shape. He keeps himself fit. He's an engaging speaker. He doesn't speak the truth, but he's an engaging speaker. So it's real easy to build up a following because he checks all those boxes. Same thing's true then. People are just as susceptible, and these are immature believers, so they're really susceptible to that kind of thing. And I know exactly what he's talking about here is he's concerned for these people that he cares about. So in verse 4, he says, "For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed," I'll get it out in a second, "or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough." He's saying you guys are falling for this. Don't fall for this. Don't allow yourself to be being led astray. This happens all the time. This is why cults work. Why in the Bible Belt can you drive around and see, whether it be Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever it is? Why are they successful here? In a part of the country where supposedly people would know the Bible, it wouldn't be susceptible to that. Well, because many people are immature in their faith and never knew why they believed what they believed. I drove past, I was down in DeSoto County today making a hospital visit and drove past a Mormon church. You do the perimeter here in Collierville, you're gonna drive past that. The cults are successful here because people don't know their doctrine. And that people, that's the way it's always been. You and I have to know the truth. And Paul here is saying, you guys are falling for something different here. You're falling for something that isn't actually Jesus. Because he brought the true gospel. Paul in 1 Corinthians actually defined the gospel as the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. So he's trying to get them to understand that they've got a problem. And he says, so he then brings himself in. He says, indeed, it's verse 5, indeed I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. Now he gets kind of snarky here because he's pointing out these people are lifting themselves up as better than Paul. And he's saying, look, no, they are not super apostles. In fact, they're false teachers. The idea of, there's something about the self-centered, arrogant, spiritual leader that often attracts folks. Whether it be the most famous example being in the last few years, Mars Hill out in the Pacific Northwest with Mark Driscoll and how that whole thing fell apart. There's like a 13-episode podcast that's put together called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It is brutal to listen to. And just the spiritual abuse that went on in that church, and it's bad. People haven't changed. And those same sort of strategies of, me, I'm the guy, I have all the answers, you follow me, we're going to do this, and surrounding by yes men, and everybody, builds them up. That's still what's happening, and that's what's happening here. So he compares some stuff. He gives us a little insight into how they're leading these people astray. He says, even if I'm unskilled in speaking, I'm not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. Now, you and I don't think, notice I use the word think because we weren't back there in the first century, but we have enough of Paul's sermons in Acts. Paul was not a bad preacher. In fact, he was quite effective. If you read the different audiences that he preaches to, whether they're Jew or Gentile, he has the ability to turn on dime and put together a sermon that speaks to those people and their experience in a way that they understand the gospel. It's an amazing thing to see. He's brilliant. He even talks about he has the knowledge, but he says he's not the speaker that these false teachers are. What he means by that is he doesn't use the tricks of the trade, the manipulation that they would use. Paul knows rhetoric just like they do and uses it. All rhetoric is how do you organize, a speech? How do you have introduction and you have the body and the conclusion and there's argumentation and all this sort of stuff. Our girls have learned rhetoric since they were in first grade or probably kindergarten. It's a thing everybody should know and know how to be persuasive. But the people who used it for manipulation and to get the crowds all stirred up and to lead people astray, that's who these people were. This isn't any different than, the preacher who manipulates the crowd emotionally through, telling story after story after story with no biblical content, but getting everybody hyped up and get our emotions heightened because, there's been one story of one tragic death after the other. And you're like, okay, come forward now because you're about to die. Well, you've heard 10 stories about people dying in car crashes, and well, I better go down there now. But you hadn't heard the gospel. But they can say, look, we had 100 people respond. Well, you manipulated that crowd. You didn't actually preach the truth. And once again, the tactics are the same. And that's what these people are doing. They're using these rhetorical skills in the wrong way, and it's something that Paul doesn't do. Paul doesn't manipulate. He preaches the truth. He does it well, but he just lays it out there. But because the people at Corinth are immature in their faith, they are being led astray by this. They're beginning to believe and fall into this false teaching. So verse 7. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted because I preach God's gospel to you free of charge? Now, that reads funny to us, right? Like you think they'd be appreciative that he said, that he ministered to them free of charge. In other words, if you want to use Southern Baptist terms, he wasn't in their budget, right? But they actually, in the context of of the first century is the fact that he didn't charge for what he did was looked down on, because the people who made their living going around and giving speeches and persuading people, and then other people following them around so they could learn how to do it, they charged. And if you didn't, people are like, well, what's wrong with you? Because everybody else does, so what's wrong with what you're saying? And he's saying, I didn't charge you. And he calls it humbling himself. He put himself in that position because he didn't want to be a burden to them. They might have taken it wrong, and so what this implies is that these super apostles are definitely charging, right? They're getting the cash for this. Otherwise, why would they do it? All you have to do is turn on, whatever the current networks or streaming channels that have all the manipulators out there, and you see those guys and the airplanes and the multiple houses and all that stuff. Nothing new under the sun. This is still what's happening here. And he mentions how he got his support. And he uses hyperbole. He says, I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. Now, he didn't rob them. They were supporting Paul, but he's trying to get them to understand that he used what they were giving him from these other churches to help the church at Corinth. Verse 9, and when I was with you and was in need, so there were times when he needed help, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. So that was brought. So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. This was an immature church. This was a church that had a lot of conflict. And the last thing Paul wanted to do was go in and say, oh, by the way, I know I'm trying to help you out to get through all this conflict and stuff, but here's my mileage. Can y'all pay me back for my gas? That's not what he's doing here. He's concerned for these people. He's trying to get them to be grounded and mature, and so he's using other resources and other churches to help him get through this. You remember, he is the very definition of a bivocational missionary. He's a tent maker. So he had a trade, and sometimes people would look down on that as he did it. But, fortunately for Paul, it was just him. He didn't have a wife and kids to support. We don't know if he was ever not married, or maybe he was a widower. We don't know. But at the time of his missionary journeys, it's just him. So he's just got to take care of himself. So that's good. And he says in other places he has learned to get by with basically nothing. Then he's learned to live with plenty all at the same time, whatever his circumstances are. So he is, he can adjust to whatever the situation is. But he says, I didn't ask you guys to help me on that. This is how much he cares for them. Verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. In other words, people know about this. He says, and why? Because I do not love you? And that's a rhetorical question. The answer to that is, of course not, he does. God knows I do. Do you hear his heart here? He's speaking very much like a parent to a child who is struggling, a child who isn't doing what they ought to do, and the parent knows it, and the parent is trying everything they can to convince them about what they're doing is not correct. These are his spiritual children. He led them to the Lord. He planted this church. He's been through stuff with them. And he's getting word about these false teachers who are just, people are falling for it. And they're getting sucked in. It's a terrible thing. So verse 12. Hold on, I have to cough. Let me turn my mic off. Okay, I'm back. Verse 12. And what I am doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claims of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission they work on the same terms as we do. That's a very roundabout way of saying we are not the same people. Those super apostles and Paul are in the opposite business. He's trying to preach the truth. They're trying to lead people astray. Paul loves to use 5 words where one will work. And so that's just how it was. That's a really long way of saying, we are not doing this. Even though they say they're the same thing, we are not. So he just comes right out in verse 13 where he's been leading up to this. For such men are false apostles. So Paul's a true apostle. He calls them deceitful workmen. disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. So he's saying they're lying about who they are. They're not just mistaken about what they're teaching. They're mistaken on purpose. They're teaching the false stuff on purpose. They are false apostles. I mean, there are times when teachers and preachers get stuff wrong. It's one of the reasons I don't go back and look at old sermons. I don't want to know. I don't. If I stand up here and preach the same text I've preached before, it's new. I started over. I don't want to know. It's just better off y'all don't remember it and I don't want to remember it, just in case something goofy happened, right? And so you just you have that fear. Well, Paul is saying these guys are doing this on purpose. They are leading you astray. They are teaching false doctrine. They've brought a different Christ. They are preaching a different Christ. And then he explains why, who's really behind all this. And no wonder, he says, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. It's probably the most famous verse in this paragraph. We all tend to know that one if we don't even know all that's around it. And then he says, here's what's going on. So it's no surprise if his servants, so these false apostles that he's just mentioned, so there's servants of Satan. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. In other words, judgment will get them. If they don't get it in this world, they'll get it in the next. There are consequences for actions. There are consequences for false teaching. There are consequences for being deceptive and being a liar. And ultimately, these people will pay that penalty. But Satan is crafty. He will, and back to like cults and things, if you encounter, well, I'm picking on Mormons tonight, so I'll continue to pick on Mormons. If you have Mormon missionaries in your house, unless they've changed this, I know, they don't. I think they know where I live. They haven't knocked on my door in years. They used to come to our little starter house in Cordova that we lived in when I was in seminary, and I had 3 visits. Each one, like we had 2 guys, elder whoever and elder whoever, they came, and then the next time it was one of those guys and the guy over him. And then the third time was the guy who was over that guy and the guy over him. And then I never saw him again. Nobody ever came back. And so I think they know where I live all the time. Like they've never come to the door again. So I'm going to pick on them. They will tell you, and they told me, well, we use the same Bible. And they know they're in the South, right? And they're like, we use the King James Bible. They do. But they also have all the other stuff too. The Book of Mormon and Doctrines and Covenants. And they have all that stuff. They actually put it above Scripture, because it comes from their prophets, and it comes from their guys, and it comes from their false teachers. But they'll get you and say, well, we use the same Bible. Look, I can show you these verses in your Bible. And then they'll tell you the wrong teaching about what's in your Bible. But it'll read the same if you carry a King James. It's a little subtle thing. So Satan's sharp. He knows what he's doing. And if you're not aware, if you're not ready for it, it's real easy to be led astray if you're not grounded in what you believe and why you believe it. And so we had growing up, this is funny, we had an interesting couple that lived next door to my parents. Sweet people, Wayne and Granny Johnny. Her name was Johnny. And she was devout Pentecostal, or is devout Pentecostal, and he is a Unitarian. I don't know how that works. But anyway, sweet people. They lived next door to my parents for 30-something years. And in fact, I think they still live in that house. But my parents have now moved. But anyway, we used to love it when the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses would come in the cove, because we knew Wayne would get after him. He would get after him in the front yard. We'd go to the window in the living room and watch. We'd know, oh, they're coming. Oh, here comes Wayne. And he just let them have it, And but it's out there. The Mormons, for instance, continue to pick on them. If you're a Mormon boy, you get out of high school, you're going on mission for two years before you go to college. I mean, you're going to be on the mission field for 2 years. We don't have that kind of commitment to the gospel. We don't. That's not a thing we do. And so they're zealous for something that's false. I say all this to say we need to be aware that false teaching is often really subtle. And if you're not in the Word and you're not walking in the Spirit, it's real easy to be led astray. Even good people. And so here's the thing. Here's what I would encourage you on. And I was just thinking about this week. This is new advice. I was just thinking about this while I was shaving the other day. That's when I get real philosophical. Because this is a problem now. Anybody can start a YouTube channel. Anybody can start a blog. Anybody can be on Twitter. Anybody can be on Facebook. When you come across some Bible teacher, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, whatever it is, and you think, I've never heard of this person, I want to encourage you to do some digging on this person and try to find out, are they involved in a church? Do they teach Sunday school at their church? Are they a leader? Are they a teacher somewhere? Why are they doing what they're doing? My guess is most of them are just in their basement making YouTube videos. And they're not serving in the local church. They're not teaching other believers. They've just decided they want to have a crowd. They want to have a following. Check these people out. In fact, assume until you find out differently that they are a false teacher. That's probably the safest way to do it. And then, then let them show, then finally figure out, no, maybe they do know what they're talking about. But assume it's a lie. Because anybody can do it. It takes 2 seconds to sign up on Twitter. It takes 2 seconds to sign up on Facebook. You can have a YouTube page real fast. I mean, our church, we have one. We put all our services, eventually go on YouTube. It's there. So check these folks out. And I think the thing to do is really look, are they serving and are they teaching in their church? And if they're not, flee. Stay away from them. So that's new advice. I just was thinking about that this week. Jesus died for the church, and people who are truly serving the Lord and spiritual gifts are given for the church. So if you have the gift of teaching, the first place you use it is in the church where you serve. If God gives you a bigger platform, He will do that. But if you skip that step and try to go to a bigger platform without serving the people that you're a part of that body, that's not cool. That's not how that works. So, all right, so what's the point of all this before we go over the prayer sheet? It's simply, I've said it over and over again, we must be on guard against false teachers. We have to be on guard against false teachers. Not only for ourselves, but for people we care about. So when a friend says, hey, have you heard of? Or a friend says, or a spouse, or a sibling, or one of your kids or grandkids says, hey, I've been watching this guy, or have you heard of this person? Figure out what's going on. Is this a dangerous thing? Have they fallen into the trap of false teaching? They may be really dynamic. They may be engaging. They might check all the boxes and absolutely teach false doctrine. Because it's out there. Because that's how Satan functions. So, all right, well, guys, that is 2 Corinthians 11, 1 through 15. Those of you on Facebook and later on YouTube, thank you guys for being here. We're going to log off now and go to our prayer time, but thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.